Welcome all of you to the November 14th work session of the Salt Lake City Council. We do have a full agenda, so I want to jump right in. I also want to excuse Council Chair Stan Penfold. He is out today. He's ill. And Councilmember Johnston will be here, I believe, at 1 o'clock. And Councilmember Mendenhall is also on her way. So we do have a quorum, so I do want to begin. The first item on our agenda for discussion is budget amendment number 1 for fiscal year 2017-2018. And if I could invite up Ben Letke, Sylvia Richards, and John Vike, the city budget director, or Mary Beth, and John, and Patrick.
Do you want to sit here?
Yes. So thank you all. And I will turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item has a timeline where today is the first briefing, and there is a public hearing scheduled on November 28th with potential action on December 5th. The first budget amendment for the general fund has 36 adjustments. These total slightly over $60 million. Of this, $50 million is for the airport to make interest payments on outstanding bonds. If the council approves all of the proposed adjustments, the fund balance is estimated at just over 12%, or $33 million. And this is $5.7 million above the 10% minimum threshold we try to maintain. There is an update on impact fee balances and tracking. This is attachment B in the staff report, and I'll pull it up on the big screen. There are 5 tables in attachment B. These are significant improvements for tracking the available to spend or unallocated impact fee balances, as well as current appropriations for impact fee funded projects. 4 of the tables are broken down by type, so fire, police, parks, and streets. And you'll see that they list the cost center, a short description of the project,
Do you have any way of knowing when those will expire?
perfect segue to page 2 of attachment B. Page
I'm
2.
waiting for mine to load, so thanks.
Page 2 shows the quarter that impact fees are scheduled to expire and would need to be refunded. And when the city refunds impact fees, it's with interest. And what you'll notice is for the current fiscal year, there is just under $1 million in impact fees that would need to be spent. If there are no further appropriations of impact fees, those would all have to be refunded with interest. But this extends out to fiscal year 2024. The other thing I wanted to point out is on the first page, some projects have multiple appropriations and they're listed individually. So for example, in the table of parks impact fee appropriations, the council's actually made 3 separate appropriations which total just under $3.5 million, but they're each listed individually as the new downtown park or a variation on that wording. Any questions before we move on? Okay. The next item in the staff report is a update on revenue and expenses. This is taken from the administration's transmittal. And just a point of clarification, when this was originally published, it had the chart from the prior budget amendment, the last one of the previous fiscal year, but it's been updated in your packets.
Okay, if any council member has any questions or thoughts as Ben and staff are going through this, just let me know.
So I'll go through each of the individual projects. The first one is A2. This is a request for $950,000 one time to replace 5 boilers at the Steiner Aquatic Center. All 5 of the boilers need to be replaced, and 4 of them are currently non-functioning. So the outdoor pool was closed a month early because they don't have enough boilers to heat it, and the indoor pool will need to close if the final remaining boiler ceases functioning.
I think it actually did close.
Oh, there you go. The county will split the cost with the city per the interlocal agreement to replace the boilers, but the reimbursement may not come during the current fiscal year. It's possible it would come next fiscal year. And there are 2 policy questions in the staff report. The first one is why boilers that were not suitable for pool service were installed in the first place, and also if the city has any plans to avoid the situation in the future.
And I want to know the answer to that.
Yeah, but like, how old were the boilers? Were they recent? Were they?
It's cozy up here. Join us, Director.
Okay, Lisa Schaefer
Squat down.
is joining us.
Hi, Lisa Schaefer, Public Services Director. So the question is, why were the boilers installed that were not suitable for the purpose? The answer is the boilers were installed and were suitable for the purpose. They simply,
They're worn out.
they wore out. Yeah, they're over 20 years old. What wasn't suitable for the purpose was the fix, the patch that we tried to implement to keep the boilers running. So we knew that putting pool water through the boilers would degrade them faster. So the patch was not suitable, but the original boilers were 20 years old and they ran out.
Thanks.
Other questions? Great, thank you.
Next up is A3, a request for $900,000 for completing the fire training center. These funds would come, first off, the fire training center involves renovating the old fire station number 14 building, and it would also include new pump and hose testing equipment, classroom facilities, and site work. The funding, the $900,000, is going to come from an anticipated sale of fire station number 15. The land was purchased when the city was expecting to construct a new fire station, but the administration's determined that it's no longer needed, and so the land is being sold. It's under contract for $930,000, and sale is expected on or before November 15th, which is tomorrow. Since the land was purchased with fire impact fees, when the land is sold, the dollars that will be coming back to the city will also be fire impact fees. The Fire Training Center is 100% eligible for fire impact fee funding, and it would be fully funded if the council approves this request. Any amount in excess of the $900,000, and it may be $30,000 or so, would be new fire impact fees for the city to spend on eligible projects. And there's one policy question in the staff report about discussing the future service needs in the Northwest Quadrant, given the increased development interest in the area, and if a new fire station 15 might be needed at some point.
Ben, could you give us the address?
It is at 1560 South Industrial Road.
Okay, thank you.
1560 South?
Industrial
Okay.
Road.
This was property for fire station number 15. Since that time, we have purchased additional property for fire station 14 to move from the current location further west, and it's anticipated that the new fire station 14 will be able to service that area that was originally under the scope of the proposed fire station 15.
Thanks, John.
Item A4 is a request to rescope $60,000 previously appropriated for improvements at Glendale Park. The original appropriation was from 2015 CIP, and $60,000 remains. The administration is requesting to rescope that $60,000 for a new irrigation, as well as water-wise plants and a multi-use grass field. The rescope would allow the improvements to be installed with a CIP project the council approved last month for a central control irrigation system, grading and leveling of former baseball fields, and another multi-purpose green space. So the 2 projects would be built in conjunction if the rescope is approved. And just a note, this would only be phase 1 of a 2-phase project for improvements at Glendale. The second phase is being prepared and is going to go through the CIP process for next fiscal year. A5 is a request to rescope just over $92,000 for Redwood Meadows. The council previously appropriated the funds to build a transparent perimeter fence around this park, but the surrounding property owners have not reached consensus on if they want a transparent fence. In response, the Jordan Meadows Community Council did public outreach and is suggesting, and the administration is recommending, that the funds instead be used to build a new playground, shade structure, and seating. This would be ready next summer if approved.
Mr. Chair, I have a question on that.
Member Adams.
And have we priced out what that would cost for the new playground and the shading structure and the seating? And it's within that 92,000? Because I know when we were trying to do Imperial Park, it was really tough to get pricing there. We're okay at 92,000? I'm seeing nods.
I'm Nancy Monteith, landscape architect with Parks and Public Lands, and we did do a cost estimate, and the scale of playground and shade structure is going to be quite small. It's a small area, so we're confident we can get both those things in the 92,000.
Great, thanks so much. I just didn't want to see us thinking, oh yeah, we can do this, and then find out it's double that and end up with half a shade structure and one swing or something. Thanks.
That takes us to A6. This is a recapture of regional athletic complex funds for a new maintenance building. The city currently rents shipping containers to store maintenance equipment. It costs just under $5,000 annually. This is a request of just over $600,000 to build a maintenance building, which would have an irrigation supply room, a chemical room, 2 offices, a restroom, and 8 bays for storing various equipment. There are 3 funding sources. The first is $69,000 in remaining bond funds originally used to construct the rack. The second is $150,000 in remaining funds when a rack restroom was built under budget. And the third is $387,000 in remaining bond funds that were used to construct a tennis court at 11th Avenue. And so taken together, that's just over $600,000 for the new maintenance building. The project does appear to be partially eligible for impact fees, but we would need to do a further analysis to determine what percentage it is. And the 2 batches of bond funds do need to be spent.
So, Ben, is that analysis going to take place then?
We can request one. I don't
okay.
believe it's underway.
All right. Frankly, council members, I think that any time that there is an opportunity to use impact fees, we ought to thoroughly investigate every opportunity and chance to do so. So if that's not being done, I'd request that take place.
We'll follow up. That takes us to item A7, Pioneer Park Improvements Implementation Rescope. There are 2 funding sources. The first is $294,000 to install a Portland loo in Pioneer Park. The funding was originally appropriated to construct a regular park restroom, so it would still be a restroom, but a Portland loo. The second is to remove the private match requirement for $250,000 originally appropriated for general park improvements. The administration says that they haven't received a pledge for a match. They do have a meeting next month to continue the conversation, but at this time they would like to remove the match requirement to move forward with the improvements. And the improvements include a open turf central field, eliminating hiding areas, a lighted interior pathway loop, as well as a plaza area for community events. The administration reports the project would plant 2 trees for each one that's removed, and they shared attachment D to the staff report. This is a lengthy 200-plus page document summarizing various public outreach efforts related to Pioneer Park, and we've summarized the 4 recent public engagement efforts in the staff report.
Councilmember Kitchen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Since we are on the topic of Pioneer Park and I see our parks folks here, I thought I would ask a quick question regarding the existing portable restrooms on the southwest corner of Pioneer Park. The last couple of weeks I've received almost half a dozen or so complaints from residents nearby about them not being closed at night or cleaned regularly, and I'm hoping you can speak to that in some capacity. And I know there was a Hepe outbreak in this neighborhood, and I think there's a lot of concern about the public health.
So can you repeat the last part of that? Sorry.
I was referencing the hepatitis A outbreak and the public health concerns in the neighborhood.
So my name's Kristen Riker. I am the Public Lands Director. So the portable restrooms have been there for at least 4 years, and the question is, why aren't they closed at night? Is that correct? It's very hard to close those restrooms. In fact, it's really hard to close any of our restrooms. This is the first year we have started welding our restroom doors shut because we get crowbars and people get crowbars and pry open the doors. They've stolen our locks and made keys to our locks on our regular restrooms. So the portable restrooms are extremely difficult. We could potentially put a fence around them, but wire cutters are easy to come by. It would be really hard to close them. We could remove them for the winter if that's what's desired.
So with the Portland Loo installation, would that eliminate the need for the portable restroom?
So this proposal is not to add another restroom. So that was the original CIP, was to put in the Portland Loo and take out the existing. But the funding that we have is really not enough to put in enough restrooms for that park. And so our proposal is to remove the existing shuttered restroom and open up the center and continue to use the portable restrooms until we can replace that with a new restroom facility. And what we're thinking is using the Liberty Park model, where we have a concessions area and activities and restrooms associated with that. So there's more eyes on the restroom. It becomes a safer, more SEPTED type facility where we can protect our asset a little bit better.
Okay, I would like to set up a meeting offline and talk about the portable restroom and what we might be able to do to secure that.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'd love that.
Thanks.
Cindy.
Did you, I think the other part of your question was about how often they're cleaned. There was a specific expectation set up when the restrooms were put there about how often they would be cleaned. Do you have adequate
I
resources?
would have to get that information for you. I don't know exactly how often they're cleaned. It's the company that we rent from picks them up, takes them away, puts new ones in. So I'm not sure how frequently that's done. I can get you
So
that
if
information.
there's the public health
Yeah,
question that's being asked,
I'd
we
love for
probably
you to
should.
circle back with us on that information.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Rogers.
Pioneer Park, I mean, I remember this conversation that we had with the prior administration in regards to the master plan process. And there was a huge input with the group that, surrounding Pioneer Park, that they wanted to make this investment into the community. And I don't know, I just feel like this is way too rushed for a budget amendment on Pioneer Park. I think that we need to have a deeper conversation. I mean, here we come again with the things that are elements that are going to be implemented, but we haven't really discussed that. I mean, we discussed it with the option of them in with those investments. So I don't know if I don't feel comfortable moving forward until it's a final. We get, some sort of say from them saying that they're not going to do it.
Yeah. Thanks, Councilmember Rogers. Councilmember Adams.
Now, some of my concerns are the same as Councilmember Rogers, just that I think we had a conversation about this, and I think we need further discussion about what we want to adopt with what's happening at Pioneer Park. Also, on the one hand, I love the idea of planting 2 new trees for each old one, but old trees take a long time to get old. So I'm kind of concerned about taking that out. And I know when we had this conversation last time, there was a huge uproar about taking out mature trees. So I think rather than having this in a budget amendment right now, we probably need to have further discussion about what Pioneer Park looks like. And I think we definitely want to go back to those who said, yeah, we'll help you make it better, and say, put your money where your mouth is on it. But that's my concern with it.
Thanks, Councilmember Adams. And I just want to kind of reiterate what both Councilmember Rogers and Adams said, and then also request that, instead of just having an offline meeting with Councilmember Kitchen, because I think we're all very interested in the cleanliness aspect. I know that when we first funded the portable restrooms, that was one of the things that we talked about, and one of the benefits of doing it when we saw how effective these things were in San Francisco. At the time, they stated that they were cleaned nightly, that they were removed every night and cleaned every night. If that is not the case, I'd be
And
very
cleaned during the day
yeah,
by the
by the
person
people
who's
who are
maintaining it.
maintaining it.
Yeah.
And I'd be very interested in hearing kind of what that schedule is, because if it's not that's different from what I had originally anticipated.
I don't believe this restroom has an attendant.
Okay.
So I think this is different than the
So-
conversation we had after our San Francisco trip.
Okay. Great. So any information would be helpful, though. Yeah.
So what you're looking for is some comprehensive information about restrooms, how many there are, what the service level is, and any public health
Yeah,
issues that come
especially in
up,
light of some of the
and
public health issues.
maybe
that are
current funding
occurring.
and what it would if, for example, the constituents are correct and they are not being cleaned as regularly, you'd want to probably know what it would take to get to that cleanliness level.
And if we need an attendant, what that would look like. So. Hello again, Lisa.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a clarification about that because I think there is some confusion. The restrooms that were funded by the council in the Rio Grande area were funded after these portable restrooms were put into Pioneer Park and was not part of that initiative.
Mhm.
They've been there for a while. And as a solution to the issues we were experiencing with the permanent restrooms, I also wanted to make it known that the reason for this budget request and the reason that it's important timing-wise right now is because in order for us to keep our really good partner in the farmer's market, we need to do this kind of construction in the off-season. And so if we don't act now, it will be another full year before we can do this kind of construction. So if we, if anybody is interested in having a conversation about what we have talked about in the past and the plans that have been put forward, definitely let's talk about it. And let's see if we can't move forward in something that's positive for the park.
Thanks, Lisa. I do just want to say that I do recall during our discussion when we did fund the portable restrooms, that part of that discussion we also talked about attendance at the fixed restrooms of which these are part of that. And so if we do not have attendance, or if we're not doing regular cleaning, I'd be interested in knowing that, because I do recall that being part of our discussion.
Yeah, these were actually there long before that discussion, and so we have had attendance and
The
a
restrooms,
different-
yes, but
yes.
the attendance, it was the attendant issue that was part
Okay.
of
So-
that initial funding.
Yeah, we can definitely look back on
Thank
that and see if that's something that might be
Thanks.
doable. Thank you.
Mr.
Councilmember
Chair, I
Mendenhall.
just want to mention that I think I'm more in support of moving ahead with this proposal than it sounds like the tenor of the rest of you all might be. And I too would like to participate in the meetings that Derek's requested and learn more. But I think we've had a lot of history, a lot of conversation around this, and I'm ready to start to swing some hammers on this.
Thank you. Yes, Cindy.
Perhaps as staff, what we can do is go back and look. There were some things that the council was very specific in not approving, and the restrooms, I don't think were in that conversation, but the council specifically didn't approve the field in the center. So that might need to come back to the group to just review again. But we can just go through and make that clarification.
Okay, thank you. Ben?
That takes us to item A8, the tax and revenue anticipation notes interest. The original budget for this is less than what we've actually received. Interest rates have gone up twice this year, and this is a request to increase the budget by $176,000. Item A9 is a request for electric vehicle infrastructure and maintenance funding. The Sustainability Department would like to use $70,000 in rebates received from Rocky Mountain Power to build more electric vehicle charging stations. These would be combined with just over $85,000 in remaining grant funds from the Utah Division of Air Quality. And the potential locations that have been identified are the Public Safety Building Garage, Mountain Dell Golf Course, the Leonardo, the Regional Athletic Complex, and the Plaza at 349 Parking Garage.
Okay, questions? Great.
A10 is a request for 2 new FTEs in the Department of Economic Development. For this fiscal year, the cost would be just under $93,000. This would only be funding the 2 positions through the end of the fiscal year. The fully loaded cost for next fiscal year is almost $186,000. The 2 new positions would both be business development project coordinators. They'd be working closely with the economic development managers and would step in when the managers are out of the office or when their duties are already keeping them busy full-time.
Great. Councilmember Kitchen.
I guess this question is for the administration. So when we get our budget for 2019, we're anticipating the 185,000 to be rolled into that. Okay.
Correct.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, and what, do you know what the funding source will be?
I don't think at this time we know. It's too early on. Sorry about my voice.
Sorry.
It's too early on in the year to predict what revenues are coming in. Right now, the major funding sources of revenues, we're only 2 months in, even though we're 5 months into the fiscal year. We're only 2 months into actual revenue sources. I think as we move forward, we can come back with an update on where revenues sit and where we believe those funding sources come from.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Mendenhall.
and please correct me if there's another reference to this dialogue somewhere else in here, but we had some discussions just last week, I think, perhaps the week before, about looking at existing contract funding for positions such as Bill Knowles has held with the city to work with businesses around the HRCs, and I wondered if that was an item that we might need to address in this budget amendment, but I don't think I see it here.
For reference, we have that item listed on the last page as a council added item, number 1.
Thank you for showing me where.
So our goal would be to have one of the project coordinators dedicated to working with Roberta Reichlich, who is our local and small business and entrepreneurship manager, to assure that we're doing outreach with our Office of Community, the mayor's office. So this position, one of these positions will be dedicated to assisting with that effort.
To replace what was previously done by the consultant?
No. So we
To
haven't engaged a
complement?
consultant. This would be a complementary position to support that person if we were to move forward with a consultant.
And forgive me for not having the page pulled up with the council added item, but was there an additional budget increase necessary in order to reutilize that contract position, or is their current budget existing? And I don't care who answers that one.
I don't have that answer.
We're looking at how we can incorporate it into the Economic Development Department budget as it exists today. So not asking for additional funding for it.
And is there currently not funding for that contract position, or is it a general contract budget that you have?
That I don't have an answer for, but I'm happy to find out.
Please do. I'd love a follow-up on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben.
That takes us to A11. This is a request for $12,000 to install 2 permanent counters. They use infrared technology to detect pedestrians and in-pavement detectors to count the number of bicycles. The Transportation Division currently has 20 of these planned to place around the city, and this $12,000 request is for 2 more.
Great. Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you.
Item A12 is funding for Operation Rio Grande. The council had a briefing on this at October 17th, and we have attached attachment C is the memo from that October 17th briefing. And there were a couple bits of new information. The first piece of new information, which is also listed on the last page of the staff report, are potential council added items. The first item is additional de-escalation training, and the second would be retention incentives for existing police officers. And we wanted to highlight a chart. Council staff, as part of the annual budget, researched standard methods for comparing police levels of service, and one of the methods is comparing the number of officers per 10,000 residents. And the FBI uniform crime reporting data uses this method, and so we've summarized other Western and Utah cities with Salt Lake City's current level of service for police officers, and we've split it between daytime and nighttime, since the city's population increases more than 50% during the day.
Ben, can you just walk through this with me?
Yeah.
The 14.7 is 14.7 officers per 10,000 residents.
Correct.
We have about 200,000 residents.
We're using just over 190,000. This is
Okay.
from the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute's
Let's
2017 data book.
Round up for math's sake, okay?
Mm.
And say we have 200,000 residents. How many officers would that mean we would have if we have 14.7 for 200,000? Because I don't think the math works out.
So you take the number of authorized officers, which I think is 437 currently, not counting the 20 unfunded FTEs. And then you take the city's population, you divide it by 10,000, and then you divide that again by the number of officers.
So this is for, I'm sorry, the split there, I don't have it pulled up. Is it 139 point, or 13.9? What is the middle column there?
13.9 is current.
Okay.
The
Oh,
column on the right is if the 27 new police officers proposed for Operation Rio Grande are approved, what the new level of service would be per 10,000.
And this is for patrol.
This is total sworn officers. We don't have it broken down just for the patrol bureau.
I wonder about that best practice number, that nationwide, and looking at the ways that any department anywhere in this country could be divided amongst administrative versus on the street and patrol officers is a wide gamut, right? And even in the short time that I've been on the council, we've seen quite a swing from more administrative to more patrol with basically the same amount of officers as a whole. So I guess I'd like to better understand what that best practice is actually in reference to, whether it's for really talking about patrol officers that are, and I understand it takes the whole ship in order to keep our city safe and fight crime. I understand that. But I think that there's a whole lot of gray area around patrol officers. And when we're talking about adding 27, we're talking about patrol, right? We're talking about officers that we want to have filling our beats in the city and having 24-hour beat presence.
So,
Not sure if,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I'm not sure if all of those are direct officers or there's supervisory positions in that.
I don't think we know yet.
I assume there are.
27, all officers, no sergeant?
Chief Brown, if you could come up to the table, because I think that there are going to be some more questions. I know that, and I was planning on talking about this once we got to council added, but Ben, since you put the chart up early, let's just jump into this right now. So, Councilmember Mendenhall asked a question about with the 27 new officers that are in this budget amendment. How many of those would that be a mix of patrol and administrative, and what do you anticipate that mix looking like?
I would really like to see those be officers. I think some
As
of
I
our bike
think would
squads,
we.
we have about 6 officers per shift. The span of control, optimal span of control is 5 to 8, so we could put a few more officers on each of those squads without having to reduce the number of supervisors, or to reduce the number of officers by making them supervisors.
So, Chief, one of the things that, and we've, you've been great to work with, not only on Operation Rio Grande, but, in trying to, beef up our patrol division. I know that some of the reorganizations that you've implemented within the department have put more officers on the street, which I think is fantastic. But, I keep, when I talk to my community council members in the 7 different community councils that I attend, crime is something that we hear about a lot. And I know with some of the recent news coverage about the Ballpark Community Council, other community councils are seeing this as well. While I am, very supportive of the 27, I understand that anytime we talk about increasing the number of officers, there is going to be a substantial cost to doing so, which is why I know Councilmember Mendenhall and I have talked about looking at retention. We've talked about looking at a number of things instead of just trying to hire new officers, just because of the amount of training and time that it will take. So, while I'm pleased that we're looking at bringing 27 new officers on, that's a pretty big number, but frankly, I don't think it's nearly enough. So if the council were to look at increasing that number, what would you anticipate? So if we were to look at, just throw a number out, 50 officers, almost doubling what we're talking about doing here, how do you anticipate that could work? Do you believe that would have some of the desired effect that we've worked on as a council to have more neighborhood officers? If we were to bring 50 officers on, and I understand that there is going to be a substantial cost in doing that.
Sure.
How could that work, and how do you see that you could manage that?
Well, we have been living off of the 20 unfunded officers that you have allowed us to hire over and above our authorized staffing. And the way I look at it is we have 453 FTEs. Mm-hmm. I think we have some grant-funded positions that aren't counted, but we have 453 officers that work in the Salt Lake City Police Department. The council graciously has allowed us to hire 20 unfunded. We started at 10, and then we moved it to 20. So we live and die on those 20. So last time I came and talked to you, we were down 26. We're down all of those 20 unfunded plus 6 more. We're going to start a class in January of about 20 more officers. So if we had the 20 unfunded plus the 27 new, we'd be talking the same number you're talking, council member, about 50. So 473 plus the 27 is about 500. And that's really where I think we need to be. We can still use those unfunded positions to our benefit, and that's worked out very well for us. Now, the model we're looking at up here is a ratio model. There's a workflow model, and we've run the ratios back and forth. The workflow model is based on the 911 calls that you respond to, and when we've run those numbers, it's about 30 officers. So when you look at ratio and workflow, I think the 27 to 30 officers is right where we need to be.
Mr. Chair, can I jump back in on
Yep.
this? So Ben, my question about the math is that when we do the math on these numbers, it puts us at 14.7 officers to 294 total. We have 453.
Yeah.
And there's administrative desk, all sorts of positions that aren't patrol. But of the 294, can you give us a sense of what the ratio is during the day then of desk to patrol officers? I know you have a patrol number.
Yeah, we have about 190 officers in patrol right now. I would like to see another 20, 25, 30. Now,
Wait, is it really 190 or is
Well,
it
no.
20 less than that minus 6?
There's approximately 190 officers assigned to patrol. We have sergeants and lieutenants and then some CIU officers.
These are actual bodies right now. And we should actually then be at 216 if we had the 26 we're short right now. Because you said we have 20 unfunded minus 6 additional. So does that mean we really should be at 216?
No, because some of those spots are from detectives and different They don't, all the
They're not all
vacancies
patrol.
don't reside in patrol. So, when I talked about the numbers, and Ben's done it by 10,000, I did it by per thousand, and I went with the census review numbers that we had, and they're about 193 is our nighttime population. At 453, that gives us 2.3 per thousand officers, or citizens. I've heard the number of influx anywhere from 250 to 400,000 people commute into the city, and that's our service population. If you take that number, the ratio is 1.1. So the service population during the day and on evenings and weekend nights when there's a lot of people downtown, we're woefully understaffed when you start looking at the ratio model.
You said 2.3 per thousand residents.
0.3 for our service population of 193. When you take everybody else that comes down here to work during the day and then goes to jazz games and different things over the weekends, we're at 1.1 per thousand.
Well, and that's kind of what concerns me when we talk about the 193 number, 193,000, or if we round up 200,000, because while that's the population on the books, that's not our service population.
No, not even close.
I mean, during the day, how do you know what the ratio is from individuals who live outside of Salt Lake City who we're providing services to during the day? I imagine it's fairly high.
The estimate that staff used in this calculation is from Plan Salt Lake, and it was 315,000 daytime population.
Okay.
And I don't know the background of where that came from, and it's a few years old, so there's certainly room for variation.
I think the last time I looked, it was about 369,000 is what, that was
Okay.
just recently, and that was from governmental statistics. It's about 75% influx is what we have on a daytime basis.
Because it seems to me that ought to be the number that we're looking at when we're talking about what the percentage is and what the ratio is going to be, because that's what the reality of what you and your officers are having to deal with.
Right.
And I think unfortunately, what that does is shows a very dire picture of what the actual law enforcement ratio to residents is, because with the daytime population increasing the way it does, what ends up happening is most of the calls and issues that you're dealing with are in the areas where that daytime population resides, which is in downtown, and it takes away from a lot of the neighborhoods. That's one of the things that we as a council have been trying to get back to, where we have officers, not on every corner, but at least officers who are, in the neighborhoods, accessible to neighborhoods, who are, where people see them, where they're familiar with them. And so, one of the things that I would really like us to look at is balancing some of these things off of the daytime number, understanding that it's not going to look as pretty as if we do the other. But frankly, that's the reality of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more, council member. I've been trying to fill up the beats. Every beat in this city needs a cop in it, day, afternoon, and graveyards. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're downtown, on the East Bench, wherever you might be, everybody deserves to have a cop in their neighborhood. And that's what we're trying to do, and that's what we're striving for, but we don't have those numbers yet.
Yeah. Well, and that's I think what we're trying to help you with. I mean,
Yeah.
so when we talk about the numbers that are in this budget opening, I mean, how would it be different? So how are these numbers different, say, than if we were to say we fund the 20 the positions that are currently unfunded, and then allow 10 positions to still be unfunded? I mean, it still balances out, right? So I guess it seems like we're playing a lot with math.
We are.
But we're balancing it off of an incorrect number. And so what I would be interested in looking at, and I'm asking my council colleagues as well, for your input, but I would be very interested to see, when we're talking about law enforcement ratio in our city, that we focus on the daytime population, because that's the reality that we live with. And by not focusing on that, we're doing a disservice to the residents who live and pay property taxes in Salt Lake City, which funds law enforcement. And I think that it's an issue that we are going to have to deal with. It's going to be expensive. I'm really worried, when I look through these budget amendments and when we talk about the economic development positions where, we don't have, an identified way to a funding source to fund those positions. So we know that in this next budget, we're going to be dealing with $185,000 for new employees there. We don't know how we're going to fund the law enforcement officers that we need to bring on. So, frankly, when we keep getting numbers like this, I think, from the administration, we need to be very upfront and realize that a lot of the wishes that we're putting out here will be it's unsustainable without figuring out how to come up with a new revenue source. And we can move things around and stuff like that, but I don't want to surprise Salt Lake City residents when we are working on our budget next year and we're completely below where we need to be to balance our budget. So I think we all need to be careful of that. And I'm speaking not just to the administration, or not just to the council, but to the administration as well. A lot of the wishes, a lot of the things that we're putting out are going to require additional revenue. And where we get that revenue is what we're going to all have to figure out within the next 6 months before our budget's due. Councilmember Mendenhall.
So Speaker Hughes has been generous to come to some community council meetings over the last month, and Chief, I know a lot of your staff was there also for 3 hours a night hanging out. And there's been a lot of talk about the state, he would say, has the resources to support officers in Salt Lake City. And when pressed about what does that translate to for us, it became murky beyond officers. When I asked about street lighting, he basically said that needs to be negotiated. But it was clear that officers and funding for officers were on the table. So where does that fit in? Because that's money that is here. He's telling us it's here. And I wonder how that fits into this dialogue where we're looking at expenses to cover these costs. More than half of the home robberies in District 5 happen during the day, which I know is pretty typical when people are at work. And it speaks to what Charlie was saying, that during the day, the majority of the calls are in the downtown core. And I desire what you desire. We want beat patrol. We want it 24/7. But we need presence during the day, too.
Right.
So I'd like to know about that funding from the state.
David Litbeck. Patrick was nice enough to hand you the microphone.
So kind. Can you hear me on this? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Council Member. I'd like to respond to that question, if it's okay, from the perspective of where this particular funding request. I was at that council meeting, community council meeting, the comments by Speaker Hughes, and I think there is some opportunity and some need for some conversations about how the state can continue to support Salt Lake City, South Salt Lake, and Midvale as the new resource centers come online. But this particular ask and the request that you're seeing as a part of Budget Amendment 1 was a very, just to kind of go back to the conversation previously in September and October, that when Operation Rio Grande, the state, city, and county came together and looked at the budget, $67 million, I believe, for 2 years overall. All of us were asked to go back and look at what we felt we could absorb in budgets, departments, and divisions, state, city, and county, which we did, and I don't have those numbers directly in front of me. And then when we came back as a group, there was about a $20 million gap in funding for Operation Rio Grande for the 2 years. And the state committed to cover half of that funding, about $10 million, and asked for the city and county to cover $5.2 million over 2 years. So the budget amendment that you have today is our commitment on Operation Rio Grande for this first year. And I'd say even prior to that $5.2 million, we had already been asked to provide some funding to Operation Rio Grande. So the 27 officers that we came up with was was based upon looking at how do we sustain and stabilize the situation, the stable situation that has been created around Rio Grande, and not compromise safety across the entire city. And so Chief Brown, along with the Department of Public Safety, kind of came up with what the ideal number was in terms of officers necessary between the city and the state, and that's how we came up with the 27. So I think on the one hand, we're talking about those 27 officers that are part of Operation Rio Grande. And on the other hand, the budget amendment itself is also kind of separate, just looking at what we have committed to as a partner in Operation Rio Grande, if that makes sense.
So
It makes sense, and I wish it didn't, because Operation Rio Grande, Mayor and Chief did a great job at Liberty Wells Community Council just a few days after the Ballpark Community Council meeting. And you've heard from the residents. Ballpark, Liberty Wells, Operation Rio Grande is the thorn in the community side. So to say our contribution from the state is coming through Operation Rio Grande, and we're asking for daytime officers to be in our neighborhoods, and you're wanting beat patrol to fulfill those needs and not be sucked away to Operation Rio Grande, it's where that we cross a line, I think, especially in perception, around saying we're getting support, but it's at the Operation Rio Grande level when Greg Hughes is standing in the neighborhood on West Temple saying we're willing to fund officers here, not at Operation Rio Grande, right here. So sort that out for me, because I'm not seeing the line of state funds coming into my neighborhoods.
Well, I wish I could sort that out. Let me just make my best attempt. Partly what I would say is that, again, I think there are more conversations to be had with the state outside of Operation Rio Grande as we look at specifically the different neighborhoods. And so I think there is some opportunity there. And Chief Brown, for example, and I have started to talk a little bit about that what that could mean in terms of dedicated law enforcement with the new resource centers, similar to what the state is supporting at Midvale. In terms of how the resources from the state and from the county are impacting neighborhoods, I would say the biggest impact citywide that we're seeing from the state funding is the funding that's going to enhance the services. So the treatment funding that is pulling individuals from across the city, individuals experiencing homelessness, and opening up new treatment capacity. No, that doesn't
I
work.
appreciate that, but we're talking about a bifurcated population here, and that's not the piece of the population necessarily that's prowling in our neighborhoods and smashing front doors open.
Well, and Councilmember Mendenhall, I think that that's one of the problems that we have right now. We talk a lot about Operation Rio Grande. We talk a lot about the state partnership and the county partnership in Operation Rio Grande, but that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's partnership in Operation Rio Grande. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to figure out is we have to separate what's taking place with Operation Rio Grande from how we are providing services to the residents of Salt Lake City. Our responsibility as a council and as the administration is to provide resources, services to the residents of the city overall. The state, I think they're going to continue to fund just the very pinpointed idea of what they want to do, and what that means is that we are the $2.5 million. What did we commit to? $2.5 million that we need to come up with this next budget for Operation Rio Grande.
It's about 2.6 over for 2 years plus the 1.5.
So that's money that's going to be directly there, but I just don't think it's realistic that we're going to see a benefit citywide other than cleaning up the issue at Operation Rio Grande, which puts the burden on us. And that's why I was saying earlier, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with this, because it's not going to come from the state, it's not going to come from the county, and it certainly isn't going to be coming from whatever we're doing with Operation Rio Grande. It's going to be something above and beyond, and unfortunately, a lot of the things that I'm seeing right now are so specific to what the needs are for Operation Rio Grande. I get that. I'm supportive of it. I'm willing to do that, but what it's not addressing is how that is impacting your neighborhoods, my neighborhoods. You know, every neighborhood across the city has seen, you know, some level of spike in activity related to this. It's something. Operation Rio Grande is something that had to be done, but it is not a it is not going to the fix all for everything else. And so, you know, one of the things that I think we need to be realistic about when we talk about increasing the number of officers, you know, having 27 new officers, I think that's great, but it's great because it deals with the commitment that we made to Operation Rio Grande. It doesn't deal with the commitment that all of us are responsible for in working with the residents of Salt Lake City. And so, Chief, that's why I asked. I said, you know what, 27 may make sense for, you know, that specific commitment that we've made to Rio Grande, but where do we need to be in order to be where our residents feel that they need to be in terms of police service and protection? What is that number? And is it 50 officers? Is it more? Is it less? I mean, I would be hard pressed to believe that it's going to be less, but I think as long as we continue to base these numbers off of the residential population of the city, we will fail every single time. Not making the city unsafe. I'm not saying that the city's unsafe, but we are not truly addressing the issue of the level of police service that we're seeing in other cities around the country. Most cities don't have the daytime population increase that we see, because they're more isolated. They don't have, you know, they're not surrounded by 2 million people who live just outside of the city base. So I just want us to be realistic. I want us to know how we're going to deal with that daytime population in a way that doesn't take officers away from the neighborhoods and leave them vulnerable so that when Councilmember Mendenhall goes to her community council meetings, when I go to mine, when Derek goes to his, when James and Lisa go to theirs, we all hear the same thing. And I think we hear the same thing, we want the same thing. We just want to be focused on the same number, and we understand it's going to cost.
Right, and council member, I agree completely. And that goes back to the last time we visited. The 453 plus the 20, that's 473. We've been playing that game really well. The 27 additional is really where I think we need to be. So the number hovers right around 500. And in the last time we had our conversation, it would be really sad to hire in the wake of Operation Rio Grande and then through attrition let them die off. I think we should look for that long-term funding, because everywhere you drive in the city, all four corners of the city, housing projects are going up, buildings going up. This city is growing, and we haven't had a census for a couple of years. I would dare bet our number far exceeds 193, and our service population is more around 400 to 450,000 per day.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because I do think that, you know, if we fund, I don't want to fund officers based on a two-year pilot, which is what Operation Rio Grande is. It's great that we have state funding coming in, but it's going to be gone. So let's figure out how to, you know, what that number is, and we need everyone to help us figure that out.
I
in
agree
the city.
with you, Charlie. I was just trying to bring up the fact that Speaker Hughes stood in a neighborhood community council meeting and said, we have plenty of money, basically. He said, there's more money now than when I walked out of the meeting earlier today. We've got plenty of money to help your neighborhood with officers. I want to see that money, and I don't want to see it through Operation Rio Grande. I want to see it, even if it isn't a long-term funding, if it gets our foot in the door with new officers and more officers than we're even contemplating right now, I'll take it. But I want to see their skin in that conversation that they've already committed to in our community meetings. That's all I'm asking.
Can I go?
Cindy?
I might be wrong, and what we might need to do is circle back to see, I think the state and the county and the city are together in that process. I'm just wondering if we need to circle back to clarify, because it may be that adequate resources need to go into the Rio Grande project so that the city is not pulling resources out of neighborhoods. So it may be that we just ask it in a different way, that we aren't asking for the state to put resources into the neighborhoods. We're asking for them to help us fund the Rio Grande area in a way that does not require us to move people out of neighborhoods and into Rio Grande.
And I think it's that we already did that, and now we have officers that have come back, but our East Side Bike Squad disappeared to Operation Rio Grande, and that's when we experienced this spike in home robbery.
Right,
So
right.
there's
So-
some backtracking.
Yes, absolutely. So what you're asking isn't that the state put money into areas that they haven't agreed to, but that they put adequate resources into Rio Grande to help us be able to manage that and not have it disadvantage the rest of our city? Or am I saying
If
it wrong?
that's the way I have to ask it, then I can get to that point. But I've been in public meetings and in small group meetings with Speaker Hughes from the beginning of Operation Rio Grande, where he has said, we have resources to dedicate to the dispersion areas in the city.
I see.
I don't see where those resources are showing up.
So the question is about how is it that we're going to get help with the dispersing?
And I would love to
areas?
learn more. I'm sure there's lots I don't know about the way that those collaborations are happening.
Other questions or comments about this issue? Okay, Ben?
That takes us to A13. This is restoring $20,000 in matching funds for street lighting in special districts. The council appropriated these funds in the prior fiscal year. They inadvertently dropped to fund balance, and this would restore the $20,000 for the program. A14 is a request for $150,000 for the airport wing point reimbursement. There are two tables in the staff report. The request of $150,000 is broken down into two parts. The first is $72,500 for leasing of wing point during the 2017 calendar year currently, and the remaining $77,500 is for the first half of next calendar year. And this amount was calculated from an assessed value of the property, since it was not specifically included in the agreement with the FAA from 2013. There are two policy questions. The first is if there's a timeline about making a decision whether to reopen Wing Point. And the estimates for reopening Wing Point are an upfront investment of just under $900,000, with an additional $100,000 needed over the following 2 years. The second policy question is, since the course has only been minimally maintained since 2015, if those $900,000 upfront investments need to be recalculated since it's 2 years old.
Mr.
Questions?
Chair?
Yeah, Councilmember Rogers.
Yeah, I said I was not going to put any more money into Wing Point after the last request. Have we moved the ball anywhere in regards to the lease? I mean, I feel like we're in the same spot we were at least 3 years ago. Or same thing. Oh, we're working it. We're working it. I know we worked with the prior administration and now with this administration, but it just seems like it's that ever-ending, rat hole that we just keep on throwing money down.
Well, I do think Councilman, we're moving the ball. This commitment was a commitment that we made I shouldn't say a commitment, I guess we were audited, and this is the money that we're required to pay via that audit. We are moving the ball. Unfortunately, the ball is not moving in Washington right now. To the first policy question, we can't address the policy question unless we get the FAA to change some rules, and that legislation is pending in Washington, but there's nothing, unfortunately, that's getting done in Washington right now. So we're on hold. The second question really, maybe the second question is better than the first, or the first is better than the second. The longer any of us wait on this, the more expensive it's going to be to restore it. So we will have to make a decision. We, the administration, bring you back a recommendation over the next few months, one way or the other.
Mr. Chair, what is the least expensive thing we can do with Wing Point? Can we ever get out of this lease, or can we ever, what's just the least expensive solution there?
I don't know the answer to the question, what's the least expensive? I think, yes, we can get out of the lease as long as we're trying to use it for a non-aeronautical purpose or a non-airport purpose. That's what triggers these dollars. If we simply revert back to the airport for airport purposes, then that takes care of that.
Okay, thanks. And what happens if we don't give you any money for this? Am I correct in understanding we have a payment that's due? We have no choice, we have to pay
It's
it.
due, and it would probably jeopardize some of our grant assurances with the FAA if we don't pay these.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? So this doesn't do anything other than pays the debt. It doesn't deal with, I mean, we've pretty much given, it's been, the greens have been given up, right? Okay, so this is just, okay, so we can pretty much say Wing Point's closed. This is just dealing with the debt, or with the lease arrangement.
And
Okay.
can I-
So with the lease arrangement, then can't we just say we're done, turn it over to the airport and be done with it? I mean,
That's what I'm inclined to
I
do.
think
Then
that
I
we
think-
need,
then I
as a
think if
straw
we're-
poll,
if
is
we're
there any
done-
council member that wants to save that?
I'm okay. Well, we only have 4 members here, so I'd be fine straw polling it, but if that would help. But at this point, if we're not going to have the golf course, if we're not going to be doing anything else with the greens, let's just be done.
I think
I'm more than happy to make that straw poll.
Okay.
Rick had to say.
Yeah.
I think, we'd be interested in your straw poll as well. We're very close. We have to make a decision, we, the administration, regardless, because if we continue this arrangement and continue to work, the agreement with the FAA jumps substantially next year anyway. These are big numbers, but they're not nearly as large as that lease payment. So we would not put the city in a position to come back in without having pulled the trigger on whether or not we're closing Wing Point for sure.
But you're pretty much closing it for sure, because in order to, I mean, my understanding is in order to reopen the course, we would have to completely reseed the greens, reseed the, I mean, we're basically building a new golf course.
Right. If we were able to get the change that we have proposed with the FAA, then the question would be, is there a public or private partnership or some outside entity that would want to make that investment? We don't have an answer to that question because we don't have that assurance from the FAA at this point in time. That's the only way we would come back to you trying to reopen Wing Point.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm just thinking about how long it took the state of Utah to receive their Medicaid waiver.
Mm-hmm.
And we could be waiting a long time for the FAA to make any sort of move on this. And until then, it seems like the administration just wants to fund it, and that doesn't feel like a very fiscally responsible direction for this body to move.
Councilman, may I address that? I don't think that's what the administration is saying at all. We have an obligation, a debt obligation that we owe, and we need to pay that. And we have a decision to make over the next 6 months because the lease changes if we don't make that decision over the next 6 months. So if the FAA does not move, then the recommendation will be that we close Wing Point.
So you have 2 possible decisions then, right, in the next 6 months? You can keep it open and wait out, see what the FAA says, or you can decide to close it. Is that right? Those are your 2 options?
No, I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
Just trying to understand where the administration is intending to take this, that's all, so that we can make a good decision with this budget amendment.
I think what I'm saying is we understand the clock is ticking regardless, and every day that we wait on Wing Point, it becomes more expensive for anyone to make that investment, but it's all premised upon the FAA making their decision or Congress making the decision for FAA. So
Have they signaled to you that they intend to make a decision?
we have good support back there. The problem is not the support we have in Congress. The problem is there's nothing moving through Congress right now. So it's not a question of whether we have the support. It's a question of gridlock in Washington.
But Derek, back to your question, maybe I'm wrong. I still only see two options. Either we continue the lease and if it by chance the FAA does grant us, some sort of exemption, we're going to be dumping a ton of money into that course, right, to make it a golf course again. Or we close it. I mean, basically, those were the two questions that you had. Those are the two options, unless you have something different.
I think I do, Councilman. I think what I'm saying is that if we got a break in Washington, and there was a possibility that there might be private sector monies available to put into it that would alleviate the city of making that investment, we would pursue that route.
Okay, so there's that third option then, is going through a private.
But it's premised on if and possibility, so it just doesn't feel very secure for me.
But it's also, I mean, we're not just having to find someone who's going to take over management. We're going to have to find someone who's going to completely remake the golf course, because it's deteriorated to the point where that's really the only option.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I appreciate the administration's hopefulness with the FAA. I don't share your hopefulness just because this has been talked about. I've heard about it now for 4 solid years of hoping we can work with the FAA, and they always give us basically the same answer. And I think we've had the will in Washington from our representatives, but I just am not holding out a lot of hope that they're going to change anything, that unless something is radically changed, and particularly with the current administration back there, that if anything, they don't want to spend any money. And I appreciate the hopefulness, but I can't share it. I wish that I could.
Councilmember Rogers, are you still interested in calling for a straw poll?
Yeah, my straw poll is that the council not besides this payment, that the debt that we incurred, that we don't put any more money in towards Wing Point.
Okay. Councilmember Mendenhall.
Oh, and sorry, and we turn it back over to the airport and end the lease.
Okay. When do you have a time frame on turning it back?
Before there's more money required.
Okay, so as soon as possible.
Oh, I'm just saying, if they feel comfortable that they've got 3 months or 4 months, or and we're not going to be putting any more money into it, let them try and do it. But you give them that time frame. As soon as there's money that is going to have to be allocated, the lease ends and it's turned over to the airport.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
I just wanted a reminder for clarity's sake, maybe Ben can recall, or Cindy, if when we did I think it was in a budget amendment, not in the general budget, for the water main break,
yep.
and 67,000 or something
Yep.
around that. But did we do a straw poll then that said we weren't going to do any more money towards?
We did.
Okay. So what is
Yep.
this one going to hold any water?
Hopefully.
How so? Oh.
Well, I think the best way for a straw poll to hold water when it comes to funding is that we just put our foot down and say no more funding.
That's
now,
what I was hoping we were
with
going to do.
with this one, I think if
It's a contract and we have a
yeah,
debt.
if this was anything other than the contract, I would say absolutely not. And I say this as someone who fought really hard to keep Wing Point open. Worked with many of you to figure out ways to come up with that funding. I think it's very unfortunate that we've gotten to this point, but the fact that we are here, as disappointed as I am, it's irresponsible to think that it's going to be that we're going to see something different. So at this point, if we were talking about watering or doing anything else to maintain it, I would vote against it.
But we are talking about renewing a contract.
We're not talking. We're talking about paying what we, as part of the contract that was already agreed to. But with Councilmember Rogers' proposal, or with straw poll recommendation, it would be to fund this appropriation towards the debt service and request that the administration notify the FAA to turn Wing Point back to the airport as soon as possible, so that we don't incur any future payments.
And I apologize that
That's
I had to step out. But in the staff report where it states that the beginning, that this lease is beginning January 1st, 2018. and we look at it sounds to me like we're renewing something here, but what am I missing on that?
Mary Beth?
I don't think you're renewing it. It's just the lease payments going forward. The lease has been in existence for a long period of time until.
And it just renews on January 1st?
No, it doesn't renew on. It's
So what's
an ongoing
beginning on
lease.
January 1st?
I don't know what this information is, so I'd have to look that up and research that for you.
Ben, do you know what this information is referring to? Or
So
whoever wrote the staff report?
Allison Rowland may have the answer.
Thanks,
Hi, Allison.
Hello. So I believe the staff report is referring to the fact that the current agreement, the MOU between the FAA and the city would require a different payment system, a different scale of lease payments beginning 2018. So we've had a scale that was
Yeah, that
fixed with
makes
the
sense.
MOU that was done in 2013. And that system of payments is essentially done at the end of 2017. So starting in 2018, the payments would now be based on the assessed value of that property, of the Wing Point property.
So Councilmember Mendenhall, if you recall back to those glory days of
I try
all,
not to.
all of the work that was done on the golf budget, one of the things that so that thank you for that explanation, because that reminds me now where we were. So in order to get up to fair market, the FAA said that we would have a number of years of a scaled work up to that market rate. And so I think the date is the next of those steps in getting us up to the market rate.
Thank you.
Yep.
I
And-
knew
Thanks,
there was an
Allison.
answer.
And so beginning in January, then we will start the 72.5 that we owe now is for the second half of this year, right? It's the period we're in right now. And so we'll have a new payment due at whatever the new amount is in early 2018. Would that be right?
I believe that the payments that the city has made to the airport haven't followed the calendar. There hasn't been sort of a due date like you would have on a mortgage payment.
Okay.
So the city has paid it as we've gone along, but we haven't yet paid the 2017 calendar year.
So for the administration, do we know if council does our straw poll today, if the mayor, if the administration decides, okay, we're going to notify the FAA that we want to terminate this agreement, that we'll have the golf course just revert solely to the airport as open space, not as property, will we have to pay anything in 2018?
I don't know the answer to that question right now, but I can get that for you.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, so go ahead, Councilmember Mendenhall.
My question is that when you look at this council, Patrick and Mayor, who has consistently wanted this course to close, we really haven't wavered on this. Why are we continuing to explore with the FAA when ultimately it looks like you're going to come back to a council who's going to say, we're not going to give you the money?
And I would disagree with that. I would say that we have not been consistent about wanting it to close. I think we've been consistent about wanting to figure something out. So you may be consistent, but I think as far as the majority of the council goes that funded it, I don't think that is.
Well, I'm
a fair
referring
assessment.
to the straw poll we mentioned earlier, where we've said in the past, we don't want to put any more money towards Wing Point. We want this to stop.
And that is true. But that's not. I wouldn't say that we've been consistent about wanting to close.
A long time ago, we tried to figure
Yeah.
out a way to make it work.
Exactly.
It had never made money in 20 years, and that's...
Apparently,
So-
there's room to talk.
Yeah. I think the difference was Congressman Stewart was very interested in helping Salt Lake City resolve this issue and took the lead on it, had support for this, and try to ignore that. Sorry. Thought that was off.
For rude, Mayor.
But but he ran into roadblocks with the current administration and had let us know that he even with support, there was administrative problems with getting this accomplished. So I think we are finally at a point where it is probably not going to happen. And so we have to have a final discussion around this with your team a little bit. But it's helpful to hear this dialogue and know that there's, I think, a clear direction coming from the majority of you. But we do still need to make this one payment.
Thank you, Mayor. And
Thank you, Mayor.
and just to be completely clear with where we are at this point moving forward, let's do a straw poll. And I'll just kind of restate what Councilmember Rogers I think said. If I get something wrong, James, let me know. But the straw poll would be that that this council in this budget amendment agrees to fund this remaining or this payment to the FAA. That we view that as a final payment.
I think it's an payment to the
payment
airport.
to the airport to pay that, and that we believe that as a council we would like that to be the final payment, and that we request that the course revert back to airport open space as soon as possible. Is that fair? Okay. Okay, everyone clear on that? Thumbs up that we support that motion, or that straw poll. Thumbs down that we oppose it. And that, Councilmember Mendenhall, is a unanimous directive to the administration. Okay, Ben.
Mr. Chair, just being cognizant of time, we can proceed through the last several items, or we can follow up at a future council meeting, however you prefer.
Let's follow up because I know that we do have some other things that need to be done before we break for RDA. So does this give, Ben, does this give you and the administration some ideas moving forward? And then we'll finish the discussion at a future meeting. Great. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the Salt Lake City Housing Plan follow-up briefing. Joining us at the table will be Nick Tarbett, Melissa Jensen, the Director of HAND, Sean Murphy, the HAND Project and Policy Manager. And if I could respectfully request that you keep your conversations somewhat quiet as you leave the room so that we can move forward, that would be great.
Leaving us so soon. Thank you.
I also want to acknowledge Mayor Biskupski at the table. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to mention I appreciate the spirited discussion around daytime population changes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think the 340 to 360 range is very reasonable.
Great. Nick, are you going to be heading this one up, or is Ben?
We all are.
You all are.
All right, come on.
Okay, so I'll
Come
turn
on
the
in,
time
guys.
over to Ben because he's sitting in the middle. Yeah. Okay, so Nick, you are now in the middle. Turn the time over to you.
Sorry. You got room?
I've got plenty of room. Thank you, Mayor.
So hopefully you guys are warmed up for this discussion now after that. What we have here is I think our 5th briefing on the housing plan. What has occurred since October 17th is council staff and HAND staff went over all the notes and put together in red text, the changes that the council members had asked for. So the hope was today just to go through that, to see if the council members are supportive of what's being proposed. Excuse me, and then additionally, we have a few questions that were not included that we needed to get clarification from the council members if they would like these changes included in the final draft. That's on the missing middle and on ADUs. So and I guess one other item. Council staff, as you know, has been keeping track of comments and policy ideas from the council members over the past few months. We have a list of 10 that we
I think it would be helpful for council staff and for the administration to have clarification on if these are policy items that the council members all support. We know some are supported, some maybe not fully by the council, but it would help us to have direction on whether or not the council fully supports all of these statements. So we can go through however you would like to, if you'd prefer to start with those, or if you want to go through the red line option first to see whatever you think is best.
Let's start off with the red line option, just because of time.
Okay, then we will let hand staff direct that.
Great, thank you.
So thank you so much for having us. We've really enjoyed working with council staff on this and felt like we made some really great progress. So hopefully the council feels the same way. We will kind of just walk you through each sort of issue as we identified it collectively, council staff and hand staff, and sort of rationale behind the red lines that we made. We can go as quickly or as slowly as you would like. So the first one, issue addressed, there was some real sensitivity around and concern, frankly, around the modernize and flexibility language. So we heard that and we proposed the following modification to say review and modify land use. With that, we add an additional explanation under the objective to sort of lay some understanding about what those definitions mean. And so you'll see that read below, increasing flexibility around dimensional requirements and code definitions will reduce barriers to constructing housing that are not necessary.
Yep.
May I interrupt
Councilmember
you?
Evans.
This is like a 250-page staff report. What page are you on?
Oh, what's the best way to go through
It should
this?
be attachment A. You have handouts?
Attachment A?
Yeah.
Okay.
We also
This
have
one.
handouts
Okay,
for
thanks.
Thank you. We will not be going through 200 pages.
Start there. Page 1, paragraph 1. Okay, ready.
A concentrated zoning and land use review is warranted to address these critical issues and to refine code so that it focuses on form and scale of development rather than intended use. We felt like the issues that were brought up were around the idea that we were proposing that we sort of stripped all zoning, we changed everything, no code, and that's not what the intent was. So with this language, we feel like we've really addressed council concerns. However, this would be the time to discuss that if we're not in motion. I don't know if we wanted to do, Nick, based on you, if after each one we kind of want to get a consensus, might be the best way to go through this so we know where we're at the end of the day.
What I think we can do, just in keeping time in mind, instead of going through each of these, I know that the council has, I mean, we've all, read and digested all of this. And so what I want to do is as we go through this, let's just go through one, starting at 1. And just if you have any questions or concerns about the red line or have questions for staff, let's go about it that way rather than a presentation. So does anyone have any comments about item 1? Are we okay with that? Okay. Item 2, how the city benefits from missing middle. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions about this one? This may move quickly.
Great.
Uh-oh. Councilmember Johnston just pulled his microphone forward. Okay. Item 3, clarity on where parking reductions will be considered.
If I may?
Absolutely.
Mr.
Yep.
Vice Chair, I'm referring to you today. The calling out senior populations and the formerly homeless, I don't think there's intent to malign anybody, but the formerly homeless may actually have cars. They may require cars. There's no reason they wouldn't any more than anybody else, any subpopulation in the city. Just be aware of the language you're using in there, saying that they wouldn't have cars versus a millennial or a college student or somebody else. So.
Sure. Do you think that we need to, would you recommend that we change the language or just be aware of it?
Yeah, I think I'd like
Or
to
just
change
strike
the
it?
language, but just be aware of that.
Okay.
Yeah, we can't call out all the populations that may not have cars, but.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and we would be comfortable striking the specifics. I think what we were trying to offer is from experience what we know, but it's certainly not necessary from our perspective. So if we want to do sort of an amended and strike it, we're happy to do that.
I think it it is such as, that's your language, and I'm comfortable with such as senior populations, but I would strike the formerly homeless, just because the such as gives you an idea that it could be anyone, and if you've ever had to take the keys away from an aging population person, you know you don't want them driving, so let's not give them a place to park or give them a really big lot.
Thank you.
I'm going to tell my
Councilmember
grandma
Adams.
that.
We're zoning you out,
Yeah.
Grandma.
Do you have anything?
Yeah,
Councilmember Mendenhall?
the transit-rich and walkable neighborhoods reference, it sounds so good, but when we get down to defining where that's a yes and where it's a no, is pretty difficult unless you're within a quarter mile of a fixed rail station. And we see this from our ADU current ordinance and the lack of implementation for various reasons. But anyway, I like the transit-rich and walkable neighborhoods reference. I would love to hear if you feel like we're developing tools that help us to make assessments that can say yes or no to those.
That's a great question, Council Member Mendenhall. I think the way that we approach it is we really look at large transit corridors, right? So TSA zones. With the new fixed bus routes coming online, we would also look to assess those. We don't have a tool currently, but I think it's something that we would work with planning on to really say, do we think this qualifies as a transit-rich corridor? Does that answer your question sufficiently?
Yes, I think you illustrate that there's a lot of references in a lot of our documents to transit and what we define as transit, and that with our hopeful implementation of our new transit master plan and the new bus modes and our buying up service, that we need to redefine what that means to us, and that will have a big effect on parking requirements and zoning, et cetera. So.
Yeah, and to that point, one thing that I think it would be helpful if the administration were to have a conversation with UTA, one of the things that I've been consistently worried about in planning around UTA is the fact that UTA can change their routes whenever they want to, and we have no say in what happens there. And I worry that when we start making zoning decisions around something that we don't control, that we're setting ourselves up for a potential problem. And so I'm not saying that we don't zone for around the fixed busways or whatever else, but I think that if there was some sort of agreement that we could reach with UTA on these heavily used transit corridors, so that UTA, either signs an agreement or that we have some sort of an understanding that, for the next 20 years that we will have a bus route in front of these places, I would be much more at ease in planning, long-term projects around that if there was some predictability.
So are you thinking in terms of an MOU, an actual MOU?
I think I think an MOU could work, and I think that would work well, but I wouldn't say it has to be that. I just think, having something that, the planning department has and can reference and say, look, this, yes, it's a bus route, but UTA is committed that we will have something in this area for the foreseeable future, would go a long ways in helping residents in these areas feel better about density, knowing that as soon as something's built, the bus route's going to disappear and people are going to be stranded.
The transit master plan specifically calls that out, to have that, but I think we need something to hold them to it.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I think it goes both ways, though. UTA is going to follow demographics and ridership, right?
Correct.
They're also going to look to us to say, what are you zoning for in this corridor? If you want a corridor on 9th East, an example, are you zoning appropriately so that we can sustain this long term? So I don't think it's just us asking for an MOU.
No, agreed. I think it's
also us saying, where are we committing to on our zoning and our land use? Both ways with us?
No, I agree with that, and I think a lot of the discussion that we're talking about, though, deals with that corridor planning and the density planning aspect that currently doesn't exist. You're absolutely right. I mean, as much as I would love to have, a bus route along 19th East, you know, that would be very, very consistent and regular. You know, like it used to be. You know, I get that that won't happen, but if the city is committing and if the city is making planning decisions, it would be good to have kind of that reciprocity between UTA and the city. But because you're absolutely right, Councilmember Johnston, it does go both ways. And in order for UTA to have the ridership necessary, you need to have the density and to actually use it. So I think it's a good point.
We'll certainly work with the Director of Transportation as well on these
Great.
issues. I think they're well noted.
Thank you. Other questions about item number 3?
Just to
yes, go ahead.
Just to clarify, though, the only actual material change we are doing for this purpose is to strike "or the formerly homeless."
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Everyone okay with that? Okay. Item 4, mechanism to improve innovative housing types. Any thoughts on that? Item 5, additional call out of missing middle housing. There's some language here. Any thoughts or questions about this?
I just really appreciate that being emphasized there and putting in, because that is something I think is really key to one
You
of our
bet.
housing strategies.
Mr. Chair, would we anticipate adding anything under 4? Innovative housing types? So just a one-liner?
Under 5?
Oh,
No, under 4.
that's,
Oh, okay.
those changes are in the text below.
Under 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
So both
4 and 5.
4 and 5 are included in
both
that red line.
innovative
Okay, got it.
housing mechanism
you.
and missing
That
middle
makes
are
sense. Thank you,
included there.
Councilmember Mendenhall. Okay, item 6, clarify metrics reported. 7, targeted approach to inclusionary zoning. Questions or discussion? 8. Councilmember Adams.
Sorry, I'm just thinking
That's
about
okay.
this a minute. So when, in the red line part, either applied to an entire city or focused on a distinct geographic area, talk to me about that. Those are two very different things, the whole city or a targeted area.
Right,
So,
and that's just clarifying the end of that sentence
Mhm.
is sort of introducing what inclusionary zoning is.
okay,
And so that's why it says an entire city,
okay,
rather
just
than the
by
entire
definition,
city.
not saying that's what we're trying to do.
Precisely.
Got it, okay. Thank you very much.
And the last line under any future inclusionary zoning program would also feature a payment in lieu of construction. I think that should be a should under would, because we've yet to have that discussion at all. And we've heard some mixed reviews from Seattle specifically about the effectiveness of the payment in lieu programs.
Sure, and they vary a little bit. I haven't really seen one. I haven't seen a mandatory program in the U.S. that hasn't offered a
Some sort.
of payment in lieu option. But
Can we just say
Would there-
explore a future? Any future inclusionary program would, like the council could, I don't know, I think Aaron's right, that we need to be able to have a
discussion
dialogue
about
about
it.
this when we actually talk about inclusionary zoning. And I just feel like this is too directive.
Instead of would.
Yeah, or could.
Yep.
Could.
Great. I like could.
Let's do could. Strike would for could.
Thank you.
Okay.
And just a side note to that, the administration has forwarded an informational briefing or transmittal on inclusionary zoning that you've received amongst all the other stuff that council members receive. They're looking to schedule that in the coming months for that
Great.
briefing.
Item 8, leveraging of city resources. Councilmember Mendenhall.
I wondered, we didn't bring it up at the time, but there's some federal mechanisms to utilize federally owned properties, particularly for homeless resource centers. The disposition of federal property must be
Actually, it is required that it be considered for use as a homeless resource center locally before it's disposed of, and that it's this sort of little known federal law on disposition of their property. I know we're not talking about homeless resource centers necessarily in the GROW SLC plan or that specifically, but I wonder if under leveraging city resources, if we shouldn't include in some way to potentially leverage other government-owned resources, by which I mean property. Do you have any thoughts on that? You guys know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about, don't you, on the federal property disposition?
I'm only thinking of GSA properties.
So are you thinking about something that would require further legislative action to explore, or just wondering if it exists?
Well, I think when I think back to our site selection process and looking at properties all over the city, that was before I'd learned from the National League of Cities about this. And I'm sure someone in the administration knew of that, the federal disposition of property.
And federal properties were looked at.
Right, right. But there is this opportunity that can come up when a property that's owned maybe by the state or federal government is in a disposition process, and that we might want to be aware of those occurrences as they come up to seize potential partnership opportunities on developing or acquiring those properties. So I'm trying to look at where in our general growing Salt Lake plan we are saying that if there is disposition of other government-owned properties, that we're going to look at those as potential opportunities for housing. They don't have to be housing projects. They are just, it's just property in general.
Inventorying.
You can get back to me on this.
Okay. Sure. It sounds like you're requesting some sort of inventory of federal and state properties in the city, and then if one of them comes to the market, that we look to acquire it?
I think that would be a way to go about it, but I'm not sure if it's necessary because I don't know what kind of existing relationships we might have as a city with those other entities. And it might suffice to say, if you're going to be disposing of any of your properties, please come to us and let us have a dialogue about that before it goes to market or something. And I think that there might be, with reference to the homeless resource center use on federal properties, there might be some existing mechanisms that assist in that kind of handover or acquisition from state to city or federal to city. So I guess I just want us to mention in here that we're going to look for opportunities to acquire property, and there might be existing ways to leverage those acquisitions already, because I know there are for homeless resource centers.
Councilmember Mendenhall?
Yes.
How would you feel if we requested to add language that said something like, the city will work with county, state, and federal governments to dispose of surplus land for the purpose of affordable housing? I mean, because then we don't have to worry about acquiring it. I don't know that that's necessarily what we want to do anyway, but if they're getting ready to dispose, we can partner with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a great conversation
Thanks
with
for
Senator
writing that.
DeBacchus last night about this specifically, and so I think that there are legislators at the state level thinking about state land and how that might be leveraged toward affordable housing. So we don't need to get into it. We can just partner with them and express our policy interests and just reference that in this plan.
That's excellent. Thank you for writing down what I was trying to say. So do you think that we actually leveraging of city resources isn't in the title, so we don't need to change that? That I would like the language that you proposed.
Yeah, so we will get the language from you, Councilmember Kitchen, and then we'll try to figure out the best place to put it in the plan where it aligns most, if that works.
Okay, thank you. So before we go on, with the time constraint that we're under right now, I'm going to have to cut this discussion off. And what we'll do is we'll take the next items up at our next meeting when it's agended again. And that way we can have a little bit of time to talk about the third item on our work session agenda, which is the transit master plan. The reason for kind of the switch up on the agenda today and having the work session 3 and 3:30 respectively. And so we've been trying to get through some of the critical items that they had, some input on. We wanted to get that done before. So at this point, we'll move to the transit master plan. That will also have to be an abbreviated discussion, but we'll give the administration some ideas about where the council is and some of the issues that we have with the transit master plan moving forward. I just spoke with the RDA chair, Adams, and mentioned that we will be going almost immediately into our RDA session as soon as this discussion is done. So what I'd like to do is take maybe 10 minutes on the transit master plan. I know that's very, very abbreviated. We're not going to be able to finish it, but at least we'll have, we're making some progress. Then we'll take a 5-minute break at 2:10. Just to change whatever information out from the council to the RDA. And then hopefully we can begin RDA at 2:15. Does that work, Board Chair Adams? Okay,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, I'll invite Russell Weeks from the council office to the table, as well as John Larson, our new Transportation Division Director, Julianne Sabula, and Chris Jones from the Transportation Department. And Mayor Biskupski.
Thank you.
Thank you. Russell, I'll turn the time over to you to get us through some of the discussion issue. And again, maybe instead of presenting the transit master plan, because we have had a couple of different briefings on the master plan, I know that there are a couple of council questions and things that they would like to bring up. Welcome you all back to the work session of the Salt Lake City Council meeting for Tuesday, November 14th. We took a break in the middle of the presentation about the transit master plan so that we could have our RDA meeting. So I just want to thank the transportation staff for their patience and indulgence and or indulging us with this. Yes. So we'll turn the time back over to.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may clarify a logistical item.
Please do.
Apparently, Nelson Nygaard has not yet returned the revised master plan from the original discussion. So, getting a completely legislative version revised master plan by next Friday or by the Friday afternoon of the 17th might be a little difficult. However,
it won't happen.
However, maybe I could just turn it over to Chris and he can describe what they can do.
Okay.
We can, by the 17th, document all of the changes that we've requested.
Okay.
We wanted to take input from today's briefing to make sure that we'd only wanted to do one round of changes with the consultant, because every time you do the back and forth, it costs more money. So we wanted to make sure we had all the requested changes from council. We can document that in short turnaround, and then the final version can be made available in the following packet.
So the final version would be available in our office at 5 p.m. on November 28th.
And that's entirely doable.
Okay. I mean, frankly, I don't know. I'll check with the rest of the council, but my feeling is as long as we know what the changes that have been requested and we're just waiting for them to plug those things in, I think that's sufficient for the staff report. And then, once we have that plan, but you do think the time frame we'll still have it by the 28th?
I'm confident,
Yeah.
Julianne?
Very much so, yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Great. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Do any of you have any concerns? Okay. Great. Thank you. Well, that's better than it sounded like at first when Russell started talking about it. So,
So, Mr.
Remind us where we left off.
Well, Mr. Chair, I believe we left off with determining, having the council members say, if there's anything they would like included or changed in the proposed master plan.
Right. Councilmember Rogers.
I really don't. I think we discussed the Northwest Quadrant just as long as everyone knows that there will be updates coming in there. I don't know if we need to call it out in the plan. Is it called out in the plan that it will be updated as it moves forward?
I have a note to include flexibility as we learn more about how it's going to take shape, the street network and so forth.
Okay, that's just my one concern is just flexibility in improving that area.
Or Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thank you. I would like us to have a streetcar framework reference in there with regard to the potential for applying for future funding to expand the S-line. What's the feedback from the administration on that? Because we brought that up earlier.
We certainly can include a framework for that. And at the corridor study level, we determine modes. So typically the federal process is you determine the alignment. We have corridors. You go from there to an alignment and there to a mode. We can talk about valuing a streetcar network, for example, and just identifying places where capital investments are warranted is probably sufficient to apply for grants to give us the needed support for that. We have projects in the regional transportation plan, and that's what's the real requirement.
But as you spoke specifically to the S-line,
Yeah.
you've done all that work, and I guess if there's direction from the council that says you want to see that work that we've done on the S-line reflected in the master plan, we can move forward with that.
I can't imagine us applying for Tiger grants or other future funding opportunities without having it as part of our transit master plan.
Well, and frankly, I completely agree. And I know that when we started talking about the transit master plan years ago, one of the reasons that we were talking about doing, this all, stemmed from the S-line discussion and, which route, which direction, the future expansion was going to take place. And one of the things that, was very intriguing at the time was having a framework in place so that if funding did come available, that we weren't, looking at every single project as something like, well, where are we going to figure out where it's going to go? That's what the whole idea, that's what my idea for the plan was, that we would at least have in the plan what that system would look like if it were to be funded. Understanding that we don't have the funding for it, that we would have to go for federal grants, that think technology may be changing, but it just seems really weird to adopt any sort of a plan without having that critical piece in place. Because even if we move, even if we do move away from rail or technology moves away from rail, and you look at fixed bus service or whatever else, you can still use that same framework. And so it seems like even if that's not a priority of this administration, if you're going to have a plan, it ought to be a part of it. So I
Yeah,
agree.
so I think the lack of inclusion would mean that when those funding opportunities come along, it becomes the politics du jour that decide what we're applying for. And your department has done a lot of work to
Yeah.
figure out those alignments, and those should be included in this master plan. So
I agree.
I want to see it in there. And that takes us to the first bullet point, which is really weird. So this isn't a potential revision. This is a question about what's our direction regarding.
Yes, and again, that was part of the presentation on August 8th. Now, the thing is they have done, the city council has adopted a locally preferred alternative for the Sugar House line. It has done a study for the downtown line, but has not adopted a locally preferred alternative yet. But it's a reference to those studies.
The question to gauge our direction on those studies? I mean, is that, who's asking this question?
Well, given that it was on the
August 8th?
On the August 8th presentation, I would guess that it's the presenters.
Not the administration. I mean, the presenters on August 8th were the contractors, right? If my memory stands. It wasn't the administration, it was those that we contracted to create the master plan. And I guess I'm boggled because we're at the end of a master plan and they're asking us the kind of question that you ask at the beginning of the master plan. How do you feel about streetcars and the research that we've done in Salt Lake City? Like, why are we being asked our sentiments on this at the end of the master plan?
Maybe I
If
can
the answer
provide
isn't,
clarification. So we had elements included in the plan originally, and then the plan was reviewed once it was drafted, and we received some guidance to remove certain pieces. And so we did that, and it was largely references
Can you speak
to
into the
SN.
mic so we can hear you a little bit better?
Sorry.
Thank you.
And restate what you just said, because I think that was really important.
We had some pieces that were edited during, I mean, and lots of things are edited during the review process of a plan. You know, once we have kind of at the staff level worked it out, then we kind of work it up through leadership and get feedback. And so that's why we had those discussions early on, but once you have a draft plan, it's not always the same people. So we had some changes.
So the bottom line is the council interested in having a draft framework that reflects what has been decided and what has been studied?
Regarding streetcar.
That's correct.
I will not be as eloquent as you are, Julianne and Chris, in reflecting that this sounds like we started this master planning process under different administration that had a different appetite for streetcars than our current administration does. And when it came to the part in the process where it gets to be reviewed by the administration who is at play at the moment, that there were components of streetcar future potential that were removed from this master plan. And now it feels as though in this bullet point we are being asked as a council to say, do you actually want to put that stuff back in? Am I misreading this?
I'd say that through our briefings, we've heard some sentiments that there is interest in that happening, and so we are seeking direction to know whether that's what we should ask of our consultant team.
So, Councilmember Mendenhall, let's do this, because I agree with you on this, and I think that so before I move with what I'm going to do you guys have a framework in place? Do you
Yes.
So if you were to look at a streetcar system, do you have something already done that could be included in the plan, or is it something that you would have to go back and restart?
There's nothing that we have to go back and restart. There are two levels of streetcar conversation in the transit master plan as it exists. We have done some alternatives analysis on a downtown streetcar and an S-line streetcar alignment. So we have some finer grain detail of how we might go about implementing streetcar in those two areas. The transit master plan as a whole, with the frequent transit master plan or the frequent transit network, has been presented as proposed as a bus-based network that, if the right conditions exist, it could also be corridors, that identifies corridors that we could look at further streetcar expansion. So there's two different pieces that we would continue when the right conditions, if they exist, to do further analysis elsewhere in the city along those corridors as well. So it's there are two different streetcar conversations I think that we have in the transit master plan.
Okay.
And I think we're trying to get what level of detail do we want to provide in the plan.
So one of the things that I'd be interested in seeing are, which routes, that are currently identified as bus routes could easily be identified as a streetcar route. I think, getting into the specifics of, whether it's the downtown line or the Sugar House extent or the S-line extension is probably not as critical for this plant because, this is a broader transit master plan. But what if again, I'm looking at my colleagues for this. I'm going to propose that we do a straw poll so that we can be on record, as to what we think, whether or not we think that we ought to include a framework for a potential streetcar system in Salt Lake City, so that if the opportunity were to arise, that we were able to go after funding, that funding were to become available, that we would not have to go back and restart something. And if that's something that you already have, then that'll be fairly easy to do. Does that work? Okay, so the straw poll is this: thumbs up, that as a council, we want to have a streetcar framework, or a potential streetcar framework, included in the transit master plan, and have routes identified as potential streetcar routes should funding come available. Thumbs up that you support it, thumbs down that you oppose it. And that is unanimous. Okay. Okay.
Does that answer the question?
I believe so. Julianne?
Yeah.
Claire?
Councilmember Brendan Hall, other comments?
No,
Okay.
I appreciate the other bullet points in the list there, and the incorporation of those things.
Okay.
Let's get it done.
Councilmember Adams and I have talked about an element that I would also like to have included, and it's related to the Foothill Cultural District. I know in several meetings that I've had with both the Foothill Cultural District and the University of Utah, there are a lot of visitors to that area that currently do not have access to public transportation to get there. And because of the intense use of that site, one of the things that has been discussed is working with UTA, or having the cultural district work with UTA and potentially the University of Utah as well, to create a circulator to hit all, well, not to hit, but to go by each of those service those Foothill Cultural District attractions that could, with it being a circulator, it would start and stop at the stadium, the University of Rice-Eccles Stadium, which is currently part of that Foothill Cultural District. That way, visitors would have access to rail, but they would also be able to hop on a circulator to visit all of those different attractions. Because right now, between the zoo, this is the place,
Red Butte,
the Natural History Museum, the Fort Douglas Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts. There are so many different attractions on the East Bench that people do not have transit access to. And so I think including something like that in this plan would also be very, very helpful. And it's something I think we could work in conjunction with both UTA and the University of Utah to help provide. Lisa, did I miss anything?
No, just that I think it's worth noting. I thought, just for fun, I'm going to see if I wanted to go to Hogle Zoo from my house, what would that take? And the closest I could get was going to be at the post office up there on Sunnyside. And that's fine because I run it regularly, but if I had a bunch of little kids or if I were old, that doesn't serve it at all. So Charlie and I talked about this, and we would really love to see that in there. So, and I have other things if you're okay.
Absolutely.
And I have a bunch. So just thoughts as I have a hard copy of this in front of me. And in the key moves part, number 2, develop pilot programs and partnerships for employer shuttles and on-demand shared ride services. I think it's important that we make sure that they are available equally on the east and west side, so that it doesn't look like if you live on the East Bench, you get an Uber, and if you live on the west side, then you are in a shuttle, if you can make that work. So I think they need to be the same way. And I'm also interested to know what kind of feedback, if any, have you had from employers about running an employee shuttle? Has there been feedback at all?
We have had pretty extensive discussions and are actually in the process of trying to schedule a meeting right now with some folks up at the U and Research Park. I think there's a high level of receptivity to that, and I think we can make it happen. I think there's support for that. We, I think we need to reach out in more concrete ways to the West Side employers. They're more dispersed. It's a little bit less obvious an approach.
Well, it is because, I mean, the reason that this is an issue in the research park is they've had traffic and transportation problems for some time now. We're seeing that more and more on the west side. It came up earlier in the discussion.
Right.
And so when Julianne says we're talking to employers, we're actually working to identify resources to develop transportation management organizations that will have a warm body that's the champion for these transportation issues on both the west side and the east side. And part of their charge would be to assemble these associations amongst employers or major trip generators and attractors to deliver things like those employer shuttles. This is an approach, the transportation management organization approach is something that's used in similar areas across the country as a way to mitigate the issues that you're
And
bringing to
I
light.
think it would be great if along Foothill, if we were able to have a lane that is dedicated to BRT as well as those shuttles, so that people know, if I get out of my car and I ride this, I'm going to get there faster and I'm going to get something done too, which I know UTA has promoted that for a long time. So that's one thought I had. Also along those lines, I think we need to, I don't know if we do it as legislative intent or what the right process is, but two things: making sure that we have adequate service to the International Center, because we don't have that, and it might be through employee shuttles, it might be something else. Again, I did the same thing, went online to see if I wanted to go from my house to the International Center, how that would work, and it wouldn't. So that was a concern to me. And then also working with UTA to see about lengthening the hours that Tracks to the Airport runs, because I know for employees to be able to take Tracks, they work at odd hours. And I know, unfortunately, I've been on the red eye way too many times, and I've flown in late, and it looks like you would think it was noon in Times Square. It's so busy, but you don't have an alternative of how to get there or how to leave there in terms of mass transit. And I know employees don't have that option either. And so I think if we're really trying to reduce car trips, we need to try to do that. This is probably beyond the scope of our master plan, but also I think encouraging Front Runner to run on Sunday would be helpful, because I think we have residents who want to go north and south and who would take advantage of that. I know it's expensive, but I think, again, in terms of our clean air goals, especially in the winter, if we could have people being able to take Front Runner, that would be good. Also, on the list of goals, in number 4, the first bullet point is provide reliable, efficient, and frequent transit. I would love to see us add affordable there. I know we talk about it in the next one about access to opportunity for populations, but I think it should be called out specifically as affordable, because I know in your documentation you talk about how it's not affordable for families. And again, sorry, it's always about me and my family, right? But at one point I thought, okay, if our family wanted to go to a Bees baseball game from Sugar House, there's no way we are going to take the S line and Tracks, even though it will deliver us right there, because it's going to be way more money than even an expensive parking spot down there. So I'm a big proponent of the Hive Pass. I think that we should maybe try to figure out some way to do that. And let me just check and see if I have any other, sorry, I have all these many comments, but I don't think I do. I think
Lisa, you're going to have to promise us that you'll keep us up to speed on what your family's
On
up
what
to,
my family's
because
doing? Okay.
I personally am going to miss it.
Okay, I know. Well, you know.
Adventures on
What-
UTA.
They tell you to talk about what you know, right?
Yeah.
Write about what you know. Okay, yes, sir.
Can I make a couple of thoughts, I guess, some comments or thoughts? So on, you mentioned Foothill, we had a study that I think it was wrapped up maybe a year ago, or maybe even earlier this year, and it was the coordination between the city and UDOT and UTA was pretty, it was amazing.
Yeah, it was
and
very cool.
the fact that UDOT was willing to not only consider but endorse having a lane for HOV and bus service. That is a huge win, and so I
agreed.
Endorse that. I'm excited about that, and hopefully we can keep making progress on that. And that's one of the things that makes me excited about these transportation management organizations. Is I think that would be one of the keys is actually getting all of the businesses at Research Park to coordinate with each other to get the HOV usage up. So without that, I don't know that everything would work the way we want. But and then with the affordability, a question I have is, what appetite is there to explore creative options with businesses and other organizations within the city when it comes to doing deals like with the bees. I wonder if they could do a deal similar to what the University of Utah does, where your ticket is your ticket for UTA. Similarly, there's a lot of it seems like there's a disproportionate amount of eco passes that go to frankly well-paid white-collar workers, and a lot of the retail and hospitality industry for whatever reason doesn't seem to be participating. And I wonder if there are ways that city leadership could help push and promote, recognize hotel chains or Walmarts or others who might be willing to participate and give those passes to their employees.
I'd love to see us try to engage Grand America. I don't know how many employees they have, but it's a lot.
Right.
And between Grand America and Little America and all the downtown hotels, I think that'd be great because a lot of their servers don't necessarily have great transportation. I know I've seen busboys riding bikes home at midnight. So it'd be
We're paying
nice.
full cash fare to ride UTA.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like, but yeah, we'd definitely like to figure that out.
Great. Other questions or thoughts on this? Okay, thank you for coming back. We really appreciate it, and it's been an interesting day. So thanks for your patience with us. The next item on the agenda is an ordinance regarding a rezone and master plan amendment for 416 East, 500 South. Nick Tarbett from the council office is here, as well as Nick Norris, the planning director. David Gellner, the principal planner, and I know the applicants are here as well. So Nick Tarbett, I'll turn the time over to you.
And if you're all right with that, I can just let David take over and present this while I
Sure.
pull up the item.
Yep.
Okay, this was a request for a zone change and master plan amendment for a parcel at 416 East, 500 South. It fronts on 500 South at the corner of 416, or 400 East, rather. It's about a 1.5 acre parcel, or 66,000 square feet. It's zoned RO currently. It has a building on the site, and the rest, the back of the site is largely devoted to a parking deck. The request was to change it from RO to RMU, residential mixed use, and change the master plan from residential mixed use to high mixed use. There was no specific site development plan submitted by the applicant. The intent was to allow future redevelopment options to add density or retail uses. The RMU zone allows commercial, retail, and mixed uses, whereas the RO zone is strictly residential or office kind of uses. Both do allow a variety of housing. There would be taller buildings allowed underneath the RMU zoning up to 75 feet. RO is capped at 60 feet. Staff considerations, we looked at the nature of the general area, adjacent residential development, that there were few commercial or service uses within the area, although you're getting a sizable residential population that lives within the vicinity. Location along a major arterial and proximity to downtown. Also looking at the RMU zoning district has design standards, specifies a certain percentage of glass, maximum setbacks to pull that development closer to the street. Also regulates the length of blank walls, emphasizes a more pedestrian scale, and does have some limits on the maximum height of completely non-residential buildings, which would be capped at 45 feet, and a maximum number of floors in mixed-use buildings. Staff recommended approval of the zone change and master plan amendment. Felt the request was compatible, wouldn't lead to development that is out of character, and it was appropriate for the area. Planning Commission heard this item and forwarded a negative recommendation to council, feeling that it would be out of character for the area.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments?
I'd like
Councilmember
to
Mendenhall?
hear, thank you, I'd like to hear from the applicant.
And I guess before he comes up, Mr. Chair, if it's
Yeah.
okay.
Councilmember
I want
Rogers.
to know why they feel like didn't fit within the character of the neighborhood. I mean, I look at the zoning map and everything around it is pretty much RM45, right? So why specifically on this corner?
Again, there was some concern about rezoning it, I think in the absence of some kind of development proposal. I think there was a little bit of fear about what could it become. And again, they just thought it would be out of character for the area, although staff's analysis did include that within close proximity to there, we do have higher density zoning, including immediately to the east of the property is RMF 75 zoning. And there is some RMU zoning at the corner of 3rd East and 5th South, just adjacent to there.
And it is a little mixed around there. There is some lower density zoning or lower height zoning around. I think, Planning Commission also had a concern with the master plan amendment. And not, taking a more, I guess, holistic approach at the master plan amendment, looking at kind of a larger area as opposed to a site by site kind of master plan scenario. They had some concerns with that.
Can I ask a
Okay.
follow-up on
Yep.
that? It sounds like, and please tell me if it isn't the same case, that sometimes at this body, we look at a single zoning application, rezone application, and recognize the need to address that zone as a whole. And sometimes I think that we are somewhat reactive to the overall zoning need when we have a single application in front of us. This is totally true for alleyway vacations, in my opinion. Or I get my feathers all ruffled because we haven't had a big discussion about alleyways, and so I'm reluctant to approve a single alleyway application, right? So is that what you're talking about, was the sentiment at the Planning Commission, that they were recognizing this might fit better into the context of a recreation of the master plan?
Yeah, I think they were just a little concerned about looking at it just one parcel. That, they asked staff, why didn't we take a bigger approach to the master plan amendment? Look at more properties around, see if those should also be changed. And again, it went back to, some concern about, really changing the master plan and the zoning in this area when it is kind of in that transition zone between some lower density and versus higher density areas. The one thing that I guess is important to note when the city council reviews a zoning map amendment, it's not required to comply with the master plan. There's a set of standards in place that says this is what the city council should consider. It doesn't mean that if the city council wants to keep the master plan designation in place, but change, and maybe it's just not ripe at the moment for that kind of designation, but still change the zoning to allow a certain development. City council still has the prerogative to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we could invite the applicants up to speak to us. James, if you can just introduce yourself and everyone else from your party here.
I think it's just going to be me today. I'm James Alfondre with Urban Alfondre. Our family has owned this property for many, many years. The building was built in the 70s. It's reaching the end of its life cycle, and we see an opportunity to provide a better development that's on the site that helps to implement the current master plan compared to what the current RO outdated zone does now.
So, but you don't have a current plan for the site. What are some of your ideas, or
sure?
What are you thinking? What are you contemplating doing on the site?
Sure.
To warrant the rezone.
Could I run through the? No, again, we don't have. We have density studies. We don't have any schematics yet, but we have inspiration of.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Of what we want to implement there. How does this work, Nick?
Should just be able to spin through now.
Okay, so this is the current site. As you can tell, it's right on 500 South. It most of it's over an acre, and most of the land is dedicated to surface parking. This is the current streetscape of 500 South. It's lined with outdated office buildings that really don't implement the master plan. And to go back, working closely with the community council, we've worked very closely with them. They've given us an enthusiastic letter of support. They see the need for more housing. The master plan currently calls for creating more livable communities and neighborhoods through the appropriate transition of multifamily housing and mixed land uses. 1, 2, to have pedestrians use transit and walk comfortably to services, shopping, and recreational opportunities. And we are a very comfortable walk and even more comfortable bike ride to tracks, to all the amenities that the city has to offer. 3, to increase pedestrian accessibility by creating housing that supports the employment center of the downtown area. And 4, to enhance built environment that encourages employees to work and live in the central community. This is what currently 500 South is made of. It's a grand corridor going through our city, very wide, but not a lot of people out on the street. It's just these kind of outdated office buildings. Now, if you get down across the street, 500 South, where Canellas is, that's not an RO zone. It's a more flexible zone, a more urban zone. It's a D zone. So this is kind of our inspiration for Fifth South, continuing this corridor of great space that addresses the street really well, that creates just more vibrancy, more reason to walk on that street, and therefore walk to tracks and services, etc. This parcel was recently zoned to RMU, and it's just a block east of us. So we're not setting any precedences here. The precedence has already been set. And I'm not crazy about the architecture or design, but the fact that how it addresses the street is a lot more updated and what the current master plan calls for than what the RO zone and what is currently on 500 South. And this is inspiration that we have. I mean, I hope that, I know I've worked with a lot of you in the past, but we're very keen on design and creating places that people love. We petitioned to throw shipping containers in the middle of the street, for heaven's sakes, and went through that process of creating places that people like. So while we don't have a specific schematic for what we're gonna design and build there, this is inspiration, and we want to make our city and this neighborhood a better place. If I could address the Planning Commission's decision as well, while I respect it, I strongly disagree with it. The Planning Commission's recommendation has been the only negative reaction to this petition. We've worked closely with the community council, with the planning staff, etc. And I'm not completely sure for the reason of the negative recommendation, to be honest. During the hearing, the commissioner who led the discussion for a negative recommendation stated that we, the petitioner, could get this property rezoned and then turn around and sell it for a profit, which just very confusing to me on that, with no grounds as far as why a property should be rezoned or not. The same commissioner stated that this was spot zoning. And the definition of spot zoning is the application of zoning to a specific parcel or parcels of land within a larger zoned area when the rezoning is usually at odds with the city's master plan. But what the RMU zone does is not at odds with the current master plan. It actually helps implement the master plan. And what we see all around the city is outdated zoning that prohibits master plans from being implemented correctly. And we prefer not to wait around for the city to come up with, you know, you guys have a lot on your plate. The planning staff has a lot on their plate. We want to help continue pioneering and moving forward on Fifth South to make it a street that is worthy of, of the zone and being a place that's so close to tracks, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Questions for Mr. Alfondre?
Comment?
Comment?
I-
Absolutely.
I so much prefer that than to what's there right now. This is great. I've seen your other projects. I have great confidence in you. There are some people
you.
who would come before us that I might have a lot more hesitation, but I know it doesn't go with the owner, it goes with the land, but the fact that you've owned it a very, very long time, I presume you'd like to hang on to it. And even if you didn't, it looks like you're going to deliver something that will enhance the area. So
Yes.
go for it.
Thank you. I mean, our business plan, they don't make Fifth South and Fourth Easts anymore in the city. These places are a rare commodity now, and it would be foolish of us to disinvest in it now. So we have a strong investment in that area. And again, working with the community council, knowing what they want, that we'll be providing needed housing that they want, and implementing the master plan, that we're excited.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, I too am very excited about it. Having worked with you, your extended family, I'm aware of the work that you all do, and have not only the utmost confidence, but actually excitement in seeing what you come up with. So
Thank you. We're excited as well.
if there are no further comments, the timetable that we have for this, so today's the briefing. We'll be setting the public hearing for Tuesday, October 17th. We'll be holding the hearing on Tuesday the 28th, and then tentative action on December 5th. So,
Sounds good.
great. Thank you
for
very
your
much
time.
being here. And we will move to the next item, ordinance about the Northwest Quadrant rezonings. It is the Nick and Nick show. Nick Tarbett with the council office, Nick Norris, the planning director, and Tracy Tran, the principal planner.
Yes, please.
All right, Mr. Tarbett.
Again, we'll probably just let the planning staff jump into these since it's their item, so.
Good evening. So just a quick overview. This is the third phase of the Northwest Quadrant zoning amendments. So just to refresh your memory real quick, the first phase was to remove residential from the AG zone. The second phase, we created a Northwest Quadrant overlay and made some adjustments to the M1 zone. And this one will actually rezone the base zoning of some properties and remove the lowland conservancy. And so there are three parts to this. The first is to rezone properties that are currently zoned AG to M1. So everything in the hatched area on this map will be rezoned to M1. So there's these properties north of I-80, as well as a small bunch of properties just south of I-80. The second part is to remove the remainder of the lowland conservancy overlay from the Northwest Quadrant. And the third part of this is to rezone a parcel that is currently split zoned. It's half AG, half OS, and they just want their entire property to be zoned AG. And that's all I have.
Great. Questions or comments? All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
That it?
Again, the timeline on this one, we'll be holding the public hearing on the 28th and tentative council action for Tuesday, December 5th. Great. Thank you very much. The next item is our Homeless Resource Center zoning text amendment follow-up discussion. Also with Nick and Mr. Mike Malloy.
We can go ahead and start.
Great.
Michael's probably listening upstairs.
Okay.
So I guess I can't get away on this one, so I will help out. On October 17th, this was brought to the council for consideration, some of the changes to the Homeless Resource Center text amendment. The council had requested that there be 2 changes made, so this is just a check-in to make sure the council's okay with the language that's been added. If the council is supportive, this will be included into the ordinance and for potential adoption at an upcoming council meeting. So the first item was the council asked that the meetings be advertised. So we simply included the language advertised for the public meetings. So I guess the question is, does that meet the council's intent for having them be advertised?
Comments?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
In other, I'm trying to think of another format that we require advertising. I mean, there's rezone applications, and we get more specific about those.
Yeah, I think it's
advertising.
because we're managing those meetings, and then this is a new territory for the zoning ordinance to go down this path where we're going to, as part of a condition, require another entity to advertise some public meetings.
So at a minimum, for example, I would like there to be some time period of notification. I mean, they could send a tweet out 30 minutes before a meeting starts and by our lack of definition fulfill advertising. So could we say, I'm just making this up, a 14-day advertising window prior to a meeting? Can we get more specific about what advertising means?
Sorry, we're looking to the attorneys on that. One of the questions was how far we could go in that, because it is a private group and they're not subject to the open meetings.
I think it gets difficult to try to treat this entity like a public entity. Like Nick said, we have control over our own processes, and those are largely dictated by ordinance and statute. We could continue to refine this to add something more specific like that. I don't know what kind of trouble that would cause. It may be fine. I need to think about that.
Please, Paul.
But we had a discussion about trying to control what their processes are, and I don't know. I don't know where that tipping point is.
Well, I just think that advertising is without any kind of definition about what that means and how accessible that advertising is and the time period could mean that it's worthless language, basically.
I understand. Keep in mind, we're doing this through a requirement that they put these things in their security and operations plan. That's what we're calling it, right?
Right.
Okay.
So might you, I know that you're wanting us to act on this promptly, but it doesn't sound, it sounds like you're still willing to contemplate some language around this requirement.
Let me circle back with staff on this.
Okay. Thanks.
Could we ask just for potential clarification? Are you thinking like a 14-day notice, something specific like that? Or a 10-day notice, something where we just say a week ahead, they need to advertise these meetings? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, and if I could push it even further to say through normal public channels or, yeah, that I want to get to a point, and I had a non-similar experience, but where a local business district was advertising their meetings, and it was like a flyer on a pole, one flyer a day before, and anyway, people were upset about it. So
I want to make sure that we do I understand that these aren't our meetings and we can't force them to comply by the Open Meetings Act, but we need to build in as much as we can to make sure that if people want to know about this, they know how to find out about it and how to get on a listserv or where to look for when those meetings will be posted. Okay?
Other comments?
Well, is Nick gonna keep walking through the?
Yes, I will. Excuse me. The second one was when we discussed the landscape buffer requirements, and we'd noted that the existing sites are having trouble providing the buffering, given the requirements for the fire lane access. So the council expressed support to give the planning commission some latitude to say, you have to review the base zoning. If that's not sufficient buffering, the planning commission could add some more requirements on top of that, or in addition to that. So the language that we have here for the bullet point just simply says, if the zoning district does not require a landscape buffer, the planning commission may nevertheless establish appropriate landscape buffering requirements as a condition of approval to mitigate reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use. And that, what we did pull out was the requirement for the 10-foot landscape buffer.
Only on the 700 South site.
No, that's the example that the base zoning does not require that landscape buffer, but there's a buffer being included with the wall and then the fire access. So the council at the time had said it'd be okay to pull back that 10-foot requirement, but have some flexibility in case there's a future circumstance where potentially some landscape buffering could be required or could be helpful, so that they give the planning commission some of that leniency to require that.
And authority.
Yeah.
And the fire lane is 20 foot, is that right? Total? I believe
Yeah, it
that's what
was-
Jill Jones said.
It was something like that all the way around the building.
Right, wraps the entire perimeter. I feel like that fulfills the point of the landscape buffer, which on other properties wouldn't have to have a 20-foot driveway circling the entire property, because it creates obviously a double the setback, essentially, that the landscape buffer would. I feel all right about that.
So the council's okay with that?
Yep.
Thank you. So that is it for the items that we had.
Okay. Other questions or comments?
Thanks for the changes to the client language in the coordinating group.
So I think we can coordinate with the attorney's office and planning to have a proposal. I can check in with you to make sure that it meets your expectation. Then we could adopt that through a motion next week if the council's interested in proceeding that way. Or we could postpone till the 28th, whatever, the 5th.
I think let's keep it on for the 21st. If you can get that information to us and Councilmember Mendenhall in particular, so that we can have some time to look at it, then yeah, but I think let's still shoot for the 21st.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
The next three items are board appointment interviews. Our first interview is with Daniel Mendoza for the Transportation Advisory Board. Is Daniel here? Hey, how are you? Great. So why don't you join us up at the table here? Yeah, and just speak into the microphone. And first off, thank you for your interest in serving on the Transportation Advisory Board. If you could just quickly tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are interested in serving on this board.
Great. My name is Daniel Mendoza. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Division of Pulmonary at the University of Utah. I originally came here 3 years ago following an appointment in atmospheric sciences. So part of the work that we do is we look at highly resolved emissions for Salt Lake County and the Wasatch Front, and that involves transportation, residential, and commercial emissions. We've been working very closely with the Wasatch Front Regional Council, and we're designing our project, as we call it, SimCity 2040, where we're looking at the potential growth of the Wasatch Front and looking at different mitigation strategies. And we're also accounting for things such as climate variability and looking at different ways to reduce our emissions, both greenhouse gases and criteria pollutants. Blake Perez and Tyler Polson, I've been working closely with them, and they said this would be a great role for me to work with the city.
Great. Thank you very much. Questions or comments for Mr. Mendoza? Councilmember Adams.
It sounds
and then
like
Councilmember Mendenhall.
you'll bring excellent expertise to this board, and I appreciate your willingness to do it. This is not a trick question. They're not points awarded, but I'm just curious, how did you get here today?
Unfortunately, I had to drive.
And that's okay, because we know you can't get every place you want to be in transit. But do you use our mass transit system?
Oh, a lot,
with
yes.
regularity?
I use UTA services as much as I can. Unfortunately, since probably about July, they've canceled service going all the way up to hospitals, and that's just been a bummer for us.
Let's go back to that transit master plan and talk about it needs to have hospital service. That was actually one thing I was going to, but I thought they were still doing it. So
yep.
but you can take tracks to the hospital, right?
Right,
But
yes.
not, you can't get there.
None of the buses, they don't go up there anymore. So.
Okay, thanks so much.
Great. Councilmember Mendenhall.
I love board appointments. We have incredible residents willing to volunteer their time and their expertise like you. Thank you for being willing to do this and for the work that you do aside from this board. Go-centric development, most centric scenario, please. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Rogers, any comments? Okay. No, we look forward to working with you. And normally I would say that, we will be, you'll be on the consent agenda for our formal meeting, which usually you have to wait a few minutes, or actually a couple hours before it's done. If you want to sit tight and wait for probably 10 minutes, you'll be fully approved and official member of the Transportation Advisory Board. So thank you very much, Mr. Mendoza, for your
But you
your
don't
time and
have to
interest.
stick
You don't
around.
have to stay, but we'll get through it really fast. So
Okay, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Our next two appointments I'll invite up together because they're both for the Bicycle Advisory Committee. We have Omar Poole and Nathan Anderson. You could both join us up at the table. So I take it that you're not both Omar Poole and Nathan Anderson. So tell us, just introduce yourself. Tell us why you're interested in serving on the Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Yeah, so my name's Omar Poole. I live in Central 9th, and I love it there. And I was looking for a way to get involved in the city. I'm a student up at the U in urban planning. And I have a passion for alternate modes of transportation and using different resources as opposed to fossil fuels to get around and get places I need to go. And so one of those is bicycling and having the city be more bike friendly, which I think it's moving in the right direction, and there's still more work to be done. So
Great. Questions or comments for Mr. Poole? Great. Thank you very much. And again, you'll be on the consent agenda in just a couple minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. And so I take it Nathan Anderson is not here. So we will have to reschedule Mr. Anderson's interview, and when we get to the consent agenda, whoever is making the motion will just have to make the motion so that we do not include Mr. Anderson's appointment. At this point, we will, let's see, I'm going to look to our executive director to see if we have any reports or announcements. And we do not. I don't have any reports or announcements from the chair, vice chair. So we will adjourn the work session. I'm going to look back at the recorder to see how long we need to wait until we can go. Okay, so at this point, we will transition directly from our work session to our limited formal meeting of the Salt Lake City Council on November 14th, 2017. I welcome you all here. And again, I will excuse Councilmember Penfold, who is ill today, as well as Council Members Kitchen and Johnston, who are currently traveling on city business. So we do not have any public hearings. We don't have any potential action items. We don't have any comments, nor do we have any new business or unfinished business. So I will look for a motion on the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I move for approval on the consent agenda except for removing item number 5, which is the board appointment for Bicycle Advisory Committee for Nathan Anderson.
Second.
Great. Motion by Councilmember Rogers, second by Councilmember Mendenhall. Any discussion to this item? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda passes unanimously. And I do not have a gavel, so I will use my Diet Coke can as a gavel. We are adjourned. Thank you all.